Welcome to Simple Quality Living. Today I'm going to talk about Fermentation 101. Fermentation is the same thing as pickling. Pickling is the older word of fermentation. And it is the process by which natural bacteria like lactobacilli feast on sugars and starches of foods to create organic acids like lactic acid, which is a really good acid for us. You have heard of lacto-fermented foods. Same thing. It is food that has been cultured by beneficial organisms, probiotics. So let's talk about what happens during this process. The good bacteria will give off gases, meaning when you start fermenting, you will see bubbling in your jars. That is a good thing. That means the bacteria are starting to feed on the sugars and feeding off the vegetables, fruits, whatever you ferment, and they're doing their thing. The next thing is they give off beneficial acids, like the lactic acid that I mentioned earlier. So that's kind of the process of fermentation, of what happens when you ferment. Now let's talk about what fermentation does to your body and what it does to your food. So I'm just referencing from a website called Traditional Cooking School. Such a good resource. You can actually get books. There's a variety of books that they sell and that they teach about. They have e-courses and they even have printable versions, which I got. I don't really like to look at PDF files, anything that I can get my hands on, like this, hard copies. I like that better, but there are both versions. And I'll just tell you a few reasons of what it does to your food and what it does to your body. So the first thing is they are high in minerals and vitamins, especially high in vitamin C. They are really high in vitamin C. They are also high in B vitamins and others as well, but especially vitamin C. They are rich in digestive enzymes. So fermented foods actually help you digest your food easier. Fermented foods that helps increase the good bacteria in your gut. Generally, we're supposed to have 80% good bacteria and 20% bad because we're spilling some of those bad bacteria. But a lot of Americans have 20% good bacteria, 80% bad bacteria. And it is no wonder that so many people are sick. It improves your immune system. Did you know that 60 to 70% of your immunity comes from your gut? And I'm just going to read from this. Our gut wall, also known as our digestive tract, is protected by a layer of bacteria. In a healthy adult, that bacteria weighs between 3 to 4.5 pounds. What happens in your gut is not isolated. If pathogenic organisms, bacteria, yeast, fungus, etc., take over, they'll damage the gut wall and crowd out the good guys, and our overall health and immunity will tank. Here's why. When the good guys, the probiotics, are in charge, they facilitate efficient absorption of nutrients from food. They neutralize potential toxins and anti-nutrients. They produce antibiotic, anti-tumor, antiviral, and antifungal substances. And the acids they give off the gut wall an uncomfortably acidic place for pathogenic microbes. So eating lacto-fermented foods is a way to supply probiotics to keep your gut healthy. So when your gut is healthy, it works well and nourishes the rest of your body, including the immune system. Fermenting food is simple and easy. The reason being is because the bacteria do the work for you. All you gotta do is prepare it at the beginning, set it aside, and then the beautiful good bacteria does the rest of the work. You do have to monitor it once in a while to make sure there's no mold or yeast, and make sure that there's not too much CO2 built up to where it could explode your jar or whatever you're putting your ferment in. Work smarter, not harder, right? Another great thing about fermentation is it is a food preservative. It will last you for months in the fridge. And the last thing I want to mention is fermented foods are less starchy. Because the bacteria are feeding off on the sugar, there's less sugar in them. Now I want to talk about some of the myths that you might have heard about fermentation. First one is that you probably have heard that fermenting takes special equipment and supplies. It does not. You really just need a few supplies, and who knows, some of them might even be in your kitchen already. I will talk about those supplies later on. You might have heard that fermented foods may be too sour. They can be, but that all depends on you. How you know if something is fermented long enough is up to you, because it really is all about your taste, the taste of the food. So if it's been 2 weeks and you taste it and you think, I like this, then it's good. Then you're done fermenting that food. But if you feel like you need a little bit more sour of a taste, more sour flavor, then let it continue fermenting. All fermented foods are the same. They are not. The ones at the store are not even remotely close to the one at home. The reason being is because at the store, when they make it, a lot of the times they use heat, which pretty much destroys the nutrients from your ferment. They also are so quick to make it, they don't give time for the ferment. It is all about time with your ferment. You do not want to make it too fast, because then you might not get enough acid built up, you might not get enough good bacteria going, so you need time for your ferments. Not only that, but they add preservatives, additives, they add colors, dyes, and they even add vinegar, which makes it too acidic. So no, the ones at the store are not even close. You might think fermenting is difficult. It is not difficult, it is very easy. Pretty much, you slice, you mash, and I'll explain that later on. You slice, you mash, you pack it in your jar, and you set it aside. That's literally all it is. The bacteria do the work for you. Once you set it aside, they do their thing, you check up on it once in a while, and then you get to decide when it's done. You might have heard that once the fermentation starts, it's hands off. It's actually not, because once the fermentation process starts, let's say it's been 2 weeks and you're curious, okay, is it done, yes or no? You can taste it to see if it's done or not, and it can be hands-on. It's not completely off limits once you start the process. And then the last thing I want to mention is you might have heard that salt is bad. Salt is not bad in the fermentation process. In fact, it is crucial. It is one of the main things during the fermentation process, because all you need in your fermenting is salt and water. That is it. At the store, you will see a lot more. If you look at the ingredients, you will see there's a lot more in a can, something that's pickled. Like pickles, for instance, or even though there's sauerkraut, you'll see that there's vinegar, there's color, there's dyes. All you need is salt and water. That is it. Salt is necessary for fermentation. Let's talk about some of the supplies that you will need. You will first need some sort of a vessel. This could be a crock, a pot, a mason jar, Masontop jar, which is what I use. The next thing you'll need is a weight. The reason being is because when you're fermenting, the food it cannot be exposed to oxygen. It needs to be in an anaerobic environment, meaning the good bacteria, like the lactobacilli, cannot be exposed to oxygen, or else it will spoil your food. And so you need weights to keep that food down. This can be a pickle pebble, pickle puck, a stone, but make sure it's sterile, so that way it won't hurt the other bacteria. It can be even a little mason jar, even a glass jar, that has water in it, so that way it keeps your food submerged, so it's not exposed to the air. The next thing you'll need is a covering. This could be a cheesecloth, a muslin towel, so let's say you're doing sauerkraut, it could even be the actual cabbage leaf. The reason being is because you need something to cover it up, so that way the bugs or nothing else can come into your ferment. The next thing is an airlock. Pretty much what that means is you need some sort of a device that will help keep the air out, and that will help release the air, meaning the CO2 that is getting built up. because if that cannot escape, it will get trapped in that jar, in your vessel, and it will bust that vessel because there's so much CO2 built up in it. So you need some sort of an airlock to get rid of that gas, but you don't want anything coming back in it, because again, the less oxygen, the better. You will also need a tamper, or what you might hear like a pounder or a masher, to mash up your vegetables, to pretty much bruise the vegetable, because what this is doing is it's breaking up the cell walls from your vegetables, so that way the salt can go in it and get that fluid, pull that fluid out. You will do this especially with sauerkraut. You can use a pickle packer. The next thing is a slicer or a shredder or a chopper to slice up your food, like the cabbage. Slice it up, because it does need to be really in small pieces. It needs to be in thin slices, so that way it's easier to mash it up. And the last thing you need is just salt. And I don't mean like the cheap store-bought, salt that's there. You need the good quality, pure, unrefined salt, because regularly the store-bought one doesn't have the minerals. The minerals have been leached out. The different salts I recommend are Himalayan pink salt, Redmond real salt, which is actually from Utah, Celtic sea salt, just those kind of salts that are really pure, unrefined, organic, natural, just really beneficial for you, really good for your body, not the cheap stuff. A couple things to consider. When you wash your vegetables, do not use an antibacterial soap, because this will get rid of the bacteria on your food. You need that bacteria, again, for the fermentation process. But you can rinse the food in some warm water, cool water, but just do not use an antibacterial soap. Make sure you have good quality water that doesn't have chlorine, because again, chlorine kills the bacteria. If you have a filter or purifier bottles from the store that doesn't have chlorine in it, that is the best. You do not necessarily need to sterilize your equipment, because you're not canning, you're just fermenting. So you can just wash that with soap and water, warm water, but you do not need to sterilize it. When you ferment, your food should not be exposed to oxygen, because again, it needs to be in an anaerobic environment, no oxygen. And so when you ferment, there's two types of ways that you ferment. Using how you use your salt. You can either do dry salting, meaning what you're going to do with things like, with food like sauerkraut. You're just going to sprinkle the salt on the sauerkraut, you're going to mash it. That is dry salting, because through that process, as you're mashing it, breaking up the cell walls, the salt goes in, it takes the water out. That creates your brine, that creates your solution to where your food will be submerged in. Or there's also called just regular brine, where you make that solution with salt and water. Not all your food is going to be fermented through a brine, and not all your food is going to be fermented through dry salting. Depends on what it is. With the brine, you'll use that with more like beets, carrot, radishes. But the dry salting is more for like sauerkraut, because you can mash it up. When you store it, you will want to store it in a dark place. If you do not have a dark place, just make sure that it's away from direct sunlight, because that sunlight will heat up your ferment faster. Remember how I told you it's all about time? You gotta give the bacteria to do their thing. You need to give them time. The recommendation for the temperature is about 55 to 75, or like 60 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. That is a good temperature. And then when you ferment, you do not want to pack too much food in your bottle. So food like sauerkraut, where it's really juicy on the inside, right? You have a lot of water in there. During the fermenting process, that salt is still going to continue taking that water away from the cabbage, and so it's going to make the water rise. And if it rises, it may overflow, and get on your counter or whatever, and it's just a big mess. It's happened to me multiple times, and it's okay. You just make sure you have some sort of a pan underneath in case something like that does happen. In fact, when you ferment anytime, I would just suggest putting something underneath of it, no matter what it is, because you never know. Now last thing is, if your ferment does not work the first time, it's okay. No batch is the same. I have had it where I was as careful as can be and I still got mold in my ferment. If that's the case, don't give up, just try again. It's just what happens. Sometimes you can be as careful as can be, like I was saying, and things can still go wrong. Good luck!